My name is Ramona, and I am 58 years old. 20 years ago, when my husband died in that terrible car accident on Interstate 25. I never imagined I would face something worse than losing the love of my life. I raised my son Marcus alone in our three-bedroom house in the suburbs of Denver, the same house we bought together 25 years ago when we were young and full of dreams. As a nurse at Denver General Hospital, I worked double shifts to keep us afloat, always believing that the sacrifices I made were building something lasting. I thought I had taught Marcus the values of family loyalty and gratitude. I was so wrong. Before I share what happened to me, I would love to know where you are watching this from. Please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories like this one. You might want to grab a tissue because this story will take you on quite an emotional journey. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday at the hospital. I was checking on Mrs. Williams in room 302 when suddenly the world started spinning. The last thing I remembered was the cold tile floor rushing toward my face and the sound of my colleague Sarah shouting for help. When I woke up in the emergency room, Dr. Peterson was standing over me with that serious expression doctors get when they have bad news. The tests revealed what no one expects to hear at 58. My heart was failing. Years of stress, long work hours, and probably genetics had finally caught up with me. The cardiologist explained that I needed immediate surgery followed by an extended recovery period. The operation was scheduled for the next morning, and I would likely be in the hospital for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer, depending on complications. I called Marcus immediately. His voice trembled when I told him about the surgery, and for a moment I felt that familiar warmth of knowing my son cared about me. He promised to drive down from Boulder, where he lived with his wife Jennifer. They had been married for 3 years, though. I always felt like Jennifer kept her distance from me. She was polite enough during family dinners, but there was something cold about her smile, something calculating in those pale blue eyes. When Marcus arrived that evening, he looked genuinely worried. His dark hair was disheveled, and he kept running his hands through it the way he did as a child when he was nervous. Jennifer stood behind him, checking her phone more than she looked at me, but I tried not to read too much into it. People handle medical emergencies differently, I told myself. Marcus took my hands in his and promised he would take care of everything while I was recovering. He would handle the bills, water my garden, collect the mail, and make sure the house stayed secure. I had worked so hard to maintain that house, painting the shutters every few years, replanting the flower beds each spring, fixing whatever broke before it got worse. The house represented everything I had built for our family. I gave Marcus my spare keys and walked him through where I kept important documents. The deed to the house was in the fireproof safe in my bedroom closet, along with insurance papers and my will. I showed him how to work the sprinkler system for the garden and reminded him to bring in packages so they would not get stolen. He listened carefully, taking notes on his phone, and I felt so grateful to have such a responsible son. That night, as I lay in my hospital bed preparing for surgery, I felt a peace I had not experienced in years. Finally, after 2 decades of handling everything alone, I had someone I could truly depend on. Marcus had grown into the man I always hoped he would become. Whatever happened in surgery, I knew my home and my life's work would be in good hands. The surgery lasted 6 hours, much longer than anyone expected. When I finally woke up, my chest felt like it had been split open and put back together with rusty wire. Dr. Peterson explained that there had been complications, some internal bleeding that required additional procedures. My recovery would take much longer than originally planned. The first week passed in a haze of pain medication and gradual awareness. Marcus visited every day during those initial 7 days, bringing fresh flowers from the grocery store and updates about his work at the insurance company downtown. He seemed genuinely concerned about my progress, asking the nurses detailed questions about my medication and when I might be strong enough to come home. Jennifer accompanied him twice during that first week. She wore a new designer purse each time, which struck me as odd since I knew Marcus's salary was decent but not extravagant. When I complimented her on a particularly expensive-looking handbag, she'd quickly change the subject to my health. She always seemed eager to leave, checking her watch frequently and making excuses about appointments or errands. By the second week, I noticed subtle changes in Marcus's behavior. His visits became shorter and less frequent. Instead of staying for an hour, he would rush in for 20 minutes claiming work was incredibly busy with year-end insurance claims. When I asked specific questions about the house, he gave vague responses. The garden was fine, he said. Everything was under control. I asked about Mrs. Peterson, my elderly neighbor who usually brought me homemade cookies during the holidays. Marcus mentioned casually that she had moved to live with her daughter in California. This surprised me because she had never mentioned any plans to move, but people make sudden decisions, especially at her age. During the third week, I started feeling well enough to worry about practical matters. I called my insurance company to check on claims related to my surgery, and the representative mentioned that my address on file had recently been updated. When I explained that I had not requested any address change, she seemed confused and said the change had been authorized by someone with my account information. I tried to ask Marcus about this during his next visit, but he seemed distracted and kept steering the conversation toward my health and recovery. He assured me that he had been handling all correspondence and maybe the insurance company had made a mistake. His explanation seemed reasonable, but something in his tone made me uneasy. Jennifer visited alone one afternoon during my third week. She seemed different, more confident somehow, wearing jewelry I had never seen before. When I mentioned how nice she looked, she smiled in a way that did not quite reach her eyes and said they had been treating themselves to a few nice things. I assumed Marcus had received a bonus at work, or perhaps they had been saving for special purchases. The nurses had become like family to me during those long weeks. Sarah, who had been there when I collapsed, checked on me regularly, even when she was not assigned to my floor. She mentioned that she had driven past my neighborhood and noticed a lot of activity at my house, moving trucks and people going in and out. When I asked Marcus about this, he said he had hired some people to do maintenance work while I was away. The explanation made sense, but Sarah's observation planted a seed of worry that kept growing. As my fourth week in the hospital began, Dr. Peterson delivered good news and bad news. The good news was that my heart was healing well and I would probably be discharged within a few days. The bad news was that I would need several more weeks of home rest and could not return to work for at least 2 months. I felt excited about going home to my own bed, my own kitchen, and my beloved garden. Something was definitely wrong, but I could not pinpoint exactly what it was. Marcus's visits had become increasingly uncomfortable with long silences and evasive answers to simple questions. When I asked about specific neighbors or mentioned wanting to call some friends, he always found reasons why that was not a good idea. Maybe they were busy, maybe they were traveling, maybe it was better to wait until I was feeling stronger. I decided to call my house directly to check the answering machine. I knew Marcus had been staying there some nights to keep an eye on things, so I expected him to answer. Instead, a man's voice I did not recognize picked up after 3 rings. "Hello," he said in a cheerful tone. "I think I have the wrong number," I said, my heart starting to race. "What number were you trying to reach?" he asked politely. I gave him my home number, the same number I had used for 15 years. "No, that's correct," he said. "This is the Johnson residence. We just moved in 3 weeks ago." The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the hospital bed. My mind could not process what I had just heard. Moved in 3 weeks ago. That was impossible. I owned that house. I had the deed, the mortgage payments, the property tax records. There had to be some mistake. With shaking fingers, I called the number again, hoping I had dialed wrong the first time. The same man answered, and this time, I managed to stay calm enough to ask a few questions. Yes, they had purchased the house from a young man named Marcus. Yes, the sale had been completed about 3 weeks ago. No, they did not have any information about the previous owner's whereabouts. I immediately called Marcus's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried 5 more times with the same result. My chest began to hurt, and I worried that the stress might cause complications with my recovery. I called the real estate office that handled most of the sales in my neighborhood. The agent who answered was friendly but professional. She confirmed that my house had been sold 21 days ago for $230,000, which was actually above the current market value. The seller was listed as Marcus Thompson, and all the paperwork appeared to be in order. When I explained that I was Marcus's mother and the actual owner of the house, there was a long pause. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "I would suggest you contact an attorney immediately. If what you are saying is true, this could be a case of fraud." Jennifer appeared at my hospital room door that evening, but she was not the same person who had visited me before. Gone was any pretense of concern or warmth. She walked in with the confidence of someone who held all the cards in a poker game they were certain to win. "We need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. "Where is Marcus?" I demanded. "What happened to my house?" Jennifer sat down in the chair beside my bed and crossed her legs as if we were having a casual conversation about the weather. "Marcus is handling some business arrangements. He asked me to explain the situation to you." "Explain what situation? That house is mine. I have lived there for 25 years. Had," Jennifer corrected me with a cold smile. "You had lived there for 25 years. Marcus sold it 3 weeks ago to cover some debts and fund a business opportunity. The money is already gone, so there is no point in getting upset about it." I felt like I was drowning in my own bed. "That's impossible. Marcus does not have the authority to sell my house. His name is not on the deed." Jennifer reached into her purse and pulled out a folder filled with documents. "Actually, it is. You signed over power of attorney to Marcus 6 months ago, remember? When you were worried about your health and wanted to make sure someone could handle your affairs if something happened to you." I stared at the papers she placed in front of me. The signature looked like mine, but I had no memory of signing any power of attorney documents. The paperwork was complex, full of legal language that made my head spin, but the bottom line was clear. According to these documents, Marcus had full legal authority to make decisions about my property. "I never signed this," I whispered. "The notary stamp suggests otherwise," Jennifer replied. "Look, Ramona Marcus has been planning this for a while. He got into some trouble with gambling debts, and then he invested the money from refinancing your house into a business venture that did not work out. He was facing bankruptcy, and frankly, so were you by extension since your name was on all the loans." My head was spinning. What loans? What gambling debts? Jennifer's expression softened slightly, but not with compassion. It was more like pity. "Marcus has been struggling financially for 2 years. He borrowed against your house multiple times to cover his poker losses and to invest in a tech startup that turned out to be a scam. He owes money to some very serious people, Ramona. Selling the house was the only way to keep everyone safe." I tried to sit up straighter in my hospital bed despite the pain in my chest. "So, where am I supposed to live when I get out of here?" "We have researched some very nice assisted living facilities," Jennifer said, pulling out another set of brochures. "There is a lovely place called Sunset Manor about 30 minutes from here. They have a room available and the monthly fee would be covered by Social Security and your pension from the hospital." I refused to look at the assisted living brochures Jennifer had spread across my bedside table like she was showing me vacation destinations. "I want to talk to Marcus, right now." "He will be here tomorrow," Jennifer said, gathering up the paperwork. "He was hoping I could help you understand the situation first, but I can see you are going to be difficult about this." After Jennifer left, I lay in that hospital bed feeling like my entire world had collapsed. Everything I had worked for, everything I had built, everything I had planned to pass down to my son had vanished while I was unconscious from heart surgery. The betrayal cut deeper than any surgeon's knife. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about all the signs I had missed, all the red flags I had dismissed because I trusted my son completely. The expensive gifts Jennifer had been wearing, Marcus's evasive answers about the house, the strange phone calls I had overheard, the insurance company's confusion about my address. It had all been right there in front of me, and I had been too trusting to see it. Marcus finally appeared the next afternoon looking like he had not slept in days. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair was greasy, and he could not make eye contact with me. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before forcing himself to walk to my bedside. "Mom," he said quietly, "I know you are angry." "Angry?" I repeated, my voice stronger than I felt. "Marcus, you stole my house while I was having heart surgery. Angry does not begin to cover what I am feeling." He finally looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. It was not just guilt or shame. It was the look of someone who had made peace with doing terrible things. "I did not steal anything. I saved us both from financial ruin." "Explain that to me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Explain how selling my house without my knowledge or consent saved anyone from anything." Marcus pulled the chair closer to my bed and sat down heavily. "Mom, you do not understand how bad things got. I owed $47,000 to people who break legs when you do not pay them back. I had refinanced your house twice to cover the debts, so you already owed more than the house was worth. You refinanced my house when, over the past 18 months, you signed the papers, Mom. You were worried about your health, and I told you they were just updates to your existing mortgage. I remembered him bringing me papers to sign, telling me they were routine documents from the bank. I had trusted him completely, never thinking to read the fine print or ask detailed questions. Those were refinancing documents. The first one was just a refinance, Marcus continued. But when that money was gone and I still owed more, I had to take out a second mortgage. Then I thought I could fix everything by investing in this tech company that my friend Derek told me about. It was supposed to be a sure thing artificial intelligence software for small businesses. Let me guess, I said bitterly. It was not a sure thing. Derek disappeared with everyone's money 6 weeks ago. The FBI is looking for him, but the investors are never getting their money back. Marcus put his head in his hands. I was facing bankruptcy, Mom, and since your house was collateral for the loans, you would have lost it anyway. At least this way we got some money out of it. I asked, where exactly is this money you got from selling my house? Marcus was quiet for so long that I thought he was not going to answer. Finally, he looked up at me with tears in his eyes. Most of it went to pay off the gambling debts and what was left of the investment money I owed. Jennifer and I kept enough to get a fresh start somewhere else. A fresh start? I repeated slowly. And what about my fresh start, Marcus? Where exactly am I supposed to get a fresh start at 58 years old with a bad heart and no home? The assisted living place Jennifer showed you is really nice, Mom. You would have your own room meals, provided medical care on site. It might actually be better for you than trying to maintain that big house by yourself. I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest, right next to where the surgeons had repaired my heart. Get out. Mom, please try to understand. Get out of my room, Marcus. Get out right now and do not come back. He stood up slowly. His shoulders slumped in defeat. I am sorry, Mom. I really am, but I did not have any other choice. There is always a choice, I said, turning my face away from him. You chose to gamble. You chose to make bad investments. You chose to lie to me and forge my signature. You chose to sell my house while I was unconscious. Do not you dare stand there and tell me you did not have a choice. After he left, I cried harder than I had since my husband's funeral. But somewhere in the middle of those tears, something else began to emerge. It was not acceptance or forgiveness. It was anger, pure and clean and focused. Marcus might have taken my house, but he had not taken my mind or my strength. I was not dead yet, and I was not going quietly into that assisted living facility. The next morning, I asked the hospital social worker to recommend a lawyer who handled elder abuse and financial fraud cases. She gave me the number for legal aid services, which provided free legal help for people who could not afford private attorneys. When I called and explained my situation, they scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. Attorney Patricia Hawkins was a woman about my age who had been fighting financial fraud cases for 15 years. She came to my hospital room with a briefcase full of documents and a tape recorder. After listening to my story and examining the papers Jennifer had left behind, she smiled for the first time since she had arrived. Mrs. Thompson, she said, your son made several serious mistakes when he executed this plan. First, the power of attorney document he used has some irregularities that suggest forgery. Second, even with a valid power of attorney, he was not legally authorized to gift property to himself, which is essentially what he did by selling your house below market value and keeping the proceeds. She explained that power of attorney was supposed to be used for the benefit of the person granting the power, not for the personal gain of the person receiving it. By using the house sale money to pay his own debts and fund his escape to another state, Marcus had violated his fiduciary duty. What can we do about it? I asked. We can file criminal charges for fraud and elder abuse. We can also file a civil lawsuit to recover the money from the house sale. It won't be easy and it will take time, but you have a strong case. That same afternoon, Patricia helped me contact the bank that had handled the house sale. The loan officer confirmed that there had been irregularities in the transaction that they had flagged but not investigated thoroughly. The buyer's mortgage application showed a purchase price of $230,000, but the actual amount transferred to Marcus was only $180,000. The $50,000 difference had been listed as a credit for repairs, but no repair work had actually been done. We also discovered that Marcus had opened several credit cards in my name over the past year, running up debt that he had been paying with money from the house refinancing. The credit card companies had my social security number and what appeared to be my signature on the applications, but I had no memory of authorizing any of these accounts. Patricia arranged for a handwriting expert to examine all the documents Marcus had supposedly signed on my behalf. While we waited for those results, she helped me file a police report for identity theft and financial elder abuse. The detective assigned to my case was a patient woman named Rodriguez, who specialized in family financial crimes. Detective Rodriguez explained that these cases were becoming increasingly common as more elderly people lived alone and became vulnerable to exploitation by their own children. She had handled dozens of similar cases, though few as blatant as Marcus's theft of an entire house. "The good news," she said, "is that your son was not very sophisticated about covering his tracks. He left a clear paper trail and he moved too quickly. Professional con artists take years to slowly drain their victims. Your son grabbed everything at once, which makes him easier to catch and prosecute." While the legal wheels began turning, I had to solve the immediate problem of where I was going to live when I was discharged from the hospital. Patricia suggested I contact my employer to see if they had any emergency assistance programs for employees facing personal crises. The human resources director at Denver General Hospital was more helpful than I had expected. They had a fund for employees experiencing financial hardship, and they could provide a temporary housing allowance for up to 3 months. They also offered to let me return to work on a part-time basis as soon as my doctor cleared me, which would be sooner than the full-time return I had originally planned. Sarah, my colleague who had been visiting me throughout my hospital stay, offered to let me stay in her spare bedroom until I could find a permanent housing solution. She lived in a small apartment about 10 minutes from the hospital, and while it was not ideal, it would give me a safe place to recover while I fought to get my life back. The people who had bought my house turned out to be a retired couple named the Johnsons, who had moved to Colorado from Ohio to be closer to their grandchildren. When Patricia contacted them and explained the situation, they were horrified to learn they had unknowingly participated in a fraudulent transaction. Mr. Johnson called me personally to apologize and offer whatever assistance they could provide. They had already moved all their belongings into the house and made some modifications for their mobility needs, so moving out was not really an option. However, they agreed to cooperate fully with the legal proceedings and to hold the house sale money in escrow until the courts could sort out who was entitled to what. By my 25th day in the hospital, I had assembled a team of people who were fighting for me. Patricia was pursuing both criminal and civil cases against Marcus and Jennifer. Detective Rodriguez was tracking their movements and building a case for the district attorney. The Johnsons were preserving evidence and cooperating with investigators. My employer was providing financial support and a path back to work. Most importantly, I had discovered that I was not as alone as I had thought. The nurses who had cared for me, the social worker who had connected me with resources, the lawyer who had taken my case for free, Sarah, who had offered me a place to stay, they were all proof that kindness still existed in the world, even when it came from strangers rather than family. Marcus and Jennifer had apparently planned to disappear to Oregon, where Jennifer's sister lived, but Detective Rodriguez caught up with them at a motel in Grand Junction before they could leave Colorado. They were arrested on charges of elder abuse, financial fraud, identity theft, and forgery. The arrest was covered in the local news, which was embarrassing but also validating. People needed to know that these crimes were real and serious. The evidence against Marcus was overwhelming. The handwriting expert confirmed that my signature had been forged on multiple documents. Bank records showed the pattern of loans and withdrawals that had systematically stripped equity from my house. Credit card records revealed purchases that clearly benefited Marcus and Jennifer rather than me, including the expensive handbags and jewelry I had noticed during Jennifer's hospital visits. Marcus eventually pleaded guilty to avoid a longer prison sentence. He received 18 months in county jail, 3 years of probation, and an order to pay full restitution. Jennifer, who had been the mastermind behind much of the planning, received a slightly longer sentence of 2 years in state prison. The civil case took longer to resolve, but after 8 months of legal proceedings, I was awarded 80% of the money from the house sale. The remaining 20% went to legal fees and court costs, but it was enough for me to start over. I decided not to try to buy another house immediately. Instead, I found a comfortable two-bedroom apartment in a complex that catered to working professionals. It had a small balcony where I could grow herbs and flowers, and it was close enough to the hospital that I could walk to work on nice days. Returning to work part-time turned out to be exactly what I needed. My colleagues welcomed me back with genuine warmth, and I found that helping other people heal was therapeutic for my own recovery. The physical demands of nursing kept me active, and the mental challenges kept me engaged with life. I also started attending a support group for people who had been financially abused by family members. It was shocking to discover how common these crimes were, and how many people suffered in silence because they were ashamed to admit that their own children or spouses had stolen from them. In the support group, I met people who had lost much more than I had. There was a man whose daughter had stolen his entire retirement savings, a woman whose son had forged her name on a reverse mortgage that left her homeless, and a grandfather whose granddaughter had used his credit cards to fund a drug habit that destroyed his credit score. Listening to their stories made me realize that I had actually been fortunate in some ways. My health had recovered, I had been able to return to work, and I had recovered most of my financial losses. Many people in similar situations were not as lucky. 6 months after my discharge from the hospital, I had built a new life that was different from my old one, but satisfying in its own way. My apartment was smaller than my house had been, but it was easier to maintain and the location was more convenient. I had made new friends among my neighbors and coworkers, relationships based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. The financial recovery was slower than the emotional healing, but steady progress was being made. The restitution payments from Marcus would continue for several years, and I had learned to live comfortably on my reduced income. I discovered that I had been spending money on maintaining a house that was really too big for one person, and that a simpler lifestyle actually suited me better. Marcus wrote me several letters from jail apologizing for what he had done and begging for forgiveness. I read the first few letters, but they were full of excuses and self-pity rather than genuine remorse. He seemed to think that if he apologized enough times, I would eventually welcome him back into my life as if nothing had happened. I decided not to respond to his letters. Forgiveness. I learned in my support group did not require maintaining a relationship with someone who had hurt you. I could let go of my anger without letting Marcus back into my life where he could hurt me again. Jennifer's letters were different. She never apologized or asked for forgiveness. Instead, she blamed me for not being more aware of Marcus's problems and suggested that I had been irresponsible to trust him with financial decisions. Her lack of remorse made it easier to feel confident about my decision to pursue criminal charges against both of them. The legal proceedings taught me important lessons about protecting myself in the future. I opened new bank accounts that required multiple signatures for any major transactions. I updated my will to include specific protections against financial abuse. Most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts when something felt wrong rather than dismissing my concerns out of loyalty or love. My relationship with money changed as well. I had spent years accumulating savings and building equity in my house because I thought it would provide security for my old age. The experience of losing everything taught me that real security came from my ability to adapt and rebuild, not from the assets I owned. I started volunteering with legal aid services, helping other elderly people who were facing financial abuse. My experience with the system made me a valuable advocate for people who were overwhelmed by legal proceedings and bureaucratic complexity. It felt good to use my painful experience to help others avoid similar trauma. The work also kept me connected to Patricia Hawkins, who had become more than just my lawyer. She was a friend who understood the unique challenges of rebuilding your life after betrayal by family. She introduced me to other survivors who had successfully reconstructed their lives, proving that recovery was possible even after devastating losses. As my second anniversary of heart surgery approached, I reflected on how much my life had changed. The woman who had trusted blindly and given unconditionally was gone, replaced by someone who was wiser and more cautious, but also more resilient. I had learned to build relationships slowly, to set boundaries clearly, and to protect myself without becoming cynical or bitter. My garden might have been smaller, now contained in pots on my apartment balcony, but the herbs and flowers I grew there seemed more precious because I had chosen each plant carefully and tended them myself. The apartment might have been rented rather than owned, but it felt more like home than my house ever had because it represented my independence rather than my obligations to others. Sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. But that does not mean we should stop trusting altogether. It means we should learn to trust wisely and never forget to protect the foundation we have built for ourselves. Have you ever experienced betrayal by someone you trusted completely? How did you find the strength to rebuild after losing everything you thought was secure? I would love to read your stories in the comments below. Please hit that like button if this story resonated with you and subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming life's unexpected challenges. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that recovery is possible even after the most devastating betrayals. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your strength is greater than any loss you might face. Take care of yourselves and trust wisely.